Hey friend, please subscribe. 1 second for you. Big deal for me.
I was 29, 8 months into being a widower and a dad, double bagging spit-up covered onesies at a coin laundromat off Candler Road, when I heard someone trying not to cry. Not the polite kind of sniffle either. This was deep, torn-up breathing, like someone was choking back the end of something. They were sitting by the busted soda machine. A black couple, both in heavy winter coats, zipped all the way up, hands clasped tight between them. The man kept patting her knuckles like he was reminding her they were still there. Later I'd know them as Desmond and Kimberly Richardson. Right then, they were just two strangers who looked like somebody's parents left out in the cold. Wes was strapped to my chest in a carrier, running a low fever and squirming hard because he was hungry again. My plan was 10 minutes max. Wash, dry, hustle back home before he screamed the paint off the walls. Instead, I found myself walking over. "Y'all waiting on somebody?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The man looked up, calm but tired. "Our son's handling paperwork for our new place. Told us to wait here while he wraps it up." There was something off about that. I've seen all kinds of paperwork in 6 years doing remote legal calls, and none of it ever went down at a laundromat past 9. Quick note, before listening, share in the comments which city or country you're watching from. Thanks for watching Revenge by Frank. All right, let's continue. I shifted Wes higher on my chest and nodded. "Where's the place?" The woman answered this time. "Panthersville, Flowering Grove Lane." He showed us pictures, yellow siding, white porch. "You sure y'all got away there tonight? Buses are done, and it's bitterly cold out." She hesitated. "He said he'd send someone, but it's been a while." I pulled out my phone and hit Terrence. He owed me one. When he picked up, I said, "I need a ride for some folks. Elderly, baby in tow. It's one of those nights." 20 minutes later, Terrence rolled up in his Tahoe, windows rattling like loose teeth. He leaned over and shot me that look. "You sure?" I nodded. The address they had didn't exist. Terrence circled the neighborhood twice before stopping beside a weedy lot with a crooked sign. "Future Homes by Bexley." Kimberly pressed a crumpled printout against the window and whispered, "That's it. That's where he said." Desmond didn't say anything, just closed his eyes like he already knew. "Y'all got a phone?" Desmond pulled out a flip phone. Cracked, dead, useless. Only thing they remembered was the street name, and that their son, Gregory, called himself a financial planner. That's when my stomach turned. I've heard every hustle with the word planner in it, and none of them ended with a porch and yellow siding. It was past 10 when I turned around and said, "You're not sleeping out here. Come with me." They paused, like they wanted to argue. Then Wes started coughing, wet and raspy, and Kimberly stepped forward like it was instinct. She reached for him, laid her hand on his back, and he settled. That told me everything. We hauled up the narrow stairs to my one bedroom over the barber shop. I shoved 2 laundry baskets aside, cleared space on the couch, handed them bottled water from the fridge. The place smelled like old coffee and cheap detergent. Kimberly sat down and said, "It's more than enough." I believed her. 10 minutes later, my father-in-law Holden called, right on schedule. "You home?" "I am." "You alone?" "I've got company." Pause. Then the voice got hard. "Strangers and West don't mix. You know that." "I've got it under control." He hung up. No goodbye. Later that night, Desmond stared at the shelf where my wife's photo used to sit. Empty frame, still gathering dust. He didn't ask questions. Just said, "I'm sorry for your loss." Like he knew exactly when to say it and what it meant. I nodded, walked to the kitchen, and put water on for tea. Morning hit with that busted scrape from my secondhand coffee maker, the one Lena bought before Wes was born, because I kept falling asleep on calls. Kimberly was humming real low, just enough to keep Wes calm in his bouncer. I'm not ashamed to say it felt like oxygen. After months of nothing but a baby crying and Holden criticizing me over the phone, her voice was the first sound in a while that didn't make me clench up. Desmond stood near the door, already dressed, back stiff like he didn't know whether to stay or leave. He nodded at me but didn't speak. I asked for paperwork. Anything. A lease, closing statement, envelope, utility bill. They had none of it. Just the old flip phone, screen dead, and a text thread Kimberly remembered from memory. Flowering Grove Lane, she said. South End. Gregory said he handled everything with the seller himself. All we had to do was be ready to move. Desmond added. He told us not to worry about closing. Said he'd wrap it all up fast, off market, save us some fees. I didn't say anything at first. I just grabbed a pen and started writing down everything they could remember. Names, dates, the neighborhood. Then I stepped out into the stairwell and called Fisher. He picked up like he always did. Calm, direct, no nonsense. I laid it out for him. Elderly couple. Son claimed to be a financial planner. No closing docs, no real address. House doesn't exist. Fisher didn't even pause. Text me their full names, last known real address, approximate sale date. I'll pull the property index on Monday. Brian, this smells bad. Inside, Desmond sat down on the edge of my couch like the floor might fall out under him. He started talking, slow, steady, like he was building a house out of the past. They bought their home in East Lake back in 1987. Paid $62,500. One-story brick, nothing fancy. Raised 3 kids there. He'd worked maintenance across Atlanta after a few years at the shipyard in Savannah. He said it like it still mattered, like his labor had weight. He told us it was time to rest, Desmond said. Time to unlock what we earned. I nodded and opened my laptop. Even with rusty access and half-broken portals, I pulled comps in their area. Homes on the same block were going for between $610,000 and $690,000. Some fixer-uppers were north of $600,000 even with outdated kitchens. Desmond looked at me when I told him that. Gregory said we got a respectful offer. $245,000. Cash. Said he put that and a home equity line, over $400,000 total, into investments. Something long-term and tax-advantaged. My throat went tight. Did you sign anything? He said he had it handled. Said it was safer that way. We didn't talk much after that. Around 2, I called Terrence again. He drove us back to the neighborhood Kimberly had described. We passed the same crooked construction sign, the same cracked sidewalks. There was only one house with yellow siding, and it was a storage container dressed up with a cheap vinyl wrap. Kimberly stared out the window, blinking like maybe if she looked long enough the real house would show up. Desmond kept shaking his head. He wouldn't do this. He wouldn't. Kimberly didn't correct him. She just put a hand on his shoulder and stayed quiet. Back at the apartment, Holden showed up uninvited, walked in carrying a foil pan like a peace treaty he didn't mean to honor. Baked ziti. Thought you'd be too tired to cook. Thanks, I said. Then came the speech. You need to think long-term. Strangers and babies don't mix. Lena would have wanted... I cut him off. They're staying a couple nights. That's it. You sure about that? He looked around like the place already smelled different. Not if you want my help. You know how tight things are. You really want to gamble that? He left with the kind of finality that made my teeth grind. Later that evening, my landlord knocked. Mr. Ashford, Vietnamese guy in his 60s with a limp from some accident he never talked about. He handed me the lease, flipped to a paragraph, and pointed. Visitors okay. Tenants need approval. Keep it clean, quiet, no complaints. We're good. Got it. He nodded once and went back downstairs. Monday morning, Fisher called. The house sold 3 months ago. $232,000. Buyer was a Wyoming LLC with a forwarding address in Buckhead. 2 weeks later, same parcel flipped for $645,000 to another shell. Chain runs through 3 states. One filing in Nevada lists a Gregory R. as managing partner. My jaw locked. He told them $245,000. The deed says $232,000. So that's 13 grand off the top before the big flip. Brian, this is fraud. Elder abuse. Wire fraud. Recording fraud. Possibly tax fraud if the IRS ever wakes up. I put him on speaker. Desmond listened, arms crossed, jaw tight. Fisher kept talking. Odds of getting money back? Slim, but not zero. If they want to fight it, we need statements, timelines, bank info, and everything they remember. Desmond sat there a long time before saying anything. I worked overtime for 28 years. For this. That night, I ordered dinner we couldn't afford. Didn't care. Kimberly sat across from me, talking about her grandkids, names, birthdays, silly stories, like she was trying to hang on to something solid. Wes started crying again, tight and pained like his belly was in knots. I was about to reach for him when Kimberly stood, lifted him like it was second nature, flipped him belly down across her knees, and rubbed his back in slow, expert circles. He was out cold in 5 minutes. She looked at me like she was offering something more than help, like she knew how close I was to breaking and didn't plan to let that happen on her watch. After I put Wes down, I lay on the carpet beside his crib, ceiling cracked above me, heart hammering. Gregory knew every door to close, but he didn't know how many of us were still willing to knock them open again. The next morning, my phone rang at exactly 7:12 in the morning. Holden's timing was always surgical. He liked to catch me off guard, still groggy, before the baby cried and before I had a chance to think. I sat down hard on the armrest because my knees had finally quit. I looked at her, and she looked back like, "What? This is just life." I ran the numbers in my head again. Cheapest daycare within bus range was $1,180 a month. My remote legal gig expected me headset on from 9 to 6, sounding professional while pretending I wasn't raising a baby in the same room. Without Holden's backup, his money, his babysitting. Because if the wrong person asks questions, even 3 people helping each other can look like a crime. That night, Holden knocked. I didn't even have to open the door all the way before he looked past me, saw Desmond standing at the stove, and stepped back. "This is the last time I come here if those people stay," he said. He set down a grocery bag, diapers and formula, nothing else, and kept his hand on the doorknob. "I appreciate the help," I said, flat. "You sure about this?" he asked, eyes darting over my shoulder like he was expecting to see a crack pipe or a gun. "We're fine." He didn't say goodbye, didn't even look at Wes. At 2:30 in the morning, Wes woke up colicky again. I pulled him from the crib and started the usual routine, walking, bouncing, shushing. Kimberly appeared within seconds, tying her robe, already humming like this was some kind of fire drill she'd run 100 times. We sat together on the couch, her rubbing his back in slow circles, while headlights from passing cars sliced across the wall. At one point, Desmond came out, handed me a glass of water and said, "You're doing fine, son." That hit harder than it should have. Tuesday morning, I logged in and put on my headset. Back-to-back calls about probate law, transfer on death accounts, power of attorney forms. Between calls, I peeked down the hall. Kimberly had Wes on a tight routine by noon. Diaper changes, feedings, naps, tummy time. At 6:10, I walked out to the smell of garlic, greens, and cornbread. Desmond stood at the stove, apron on. Kimberly was setting plates. Wes was dozing in his bouncer. Desmond said grace before we ate. I didn't stop him. By Saturday, things had shifted. My hallway floor didn't creak anymore. Sink didn't drip. Freezer had labeled containers. I went through every drawer and cabinet, organizing what I could. Then I opened a new folder in the fireproof box and labeled it Guardianship Possible. Because somewhere in the back of my head, I knew the state might come knocking one day, and I'd need to show exactly how we ran our house. Sunday morning, I woke up to a kitchen that already smelled like coffee. Desmond was sitting with Wes on his lap, pointing to a paper about tomato planting. Kimberly was writing something on the grocery list and humming again. Nobody gave speeches. Nobody said anything about family or second chances. They just acted like people who'd lived together forever. And that's how it started. The next call from Fisher came fast. His voice clipped like he was trying to hold a live wire with one hand and flip pages with the other. "Brian, I've filed formal complaints with the DA and the Financial Crimes Unit. Gregory's shell transferred the sale funds to another LLC out in Nevada. Then it jumped into a crypto exchange I'm not naming on a recorded line. This wasn't sloppy. This was deliberate. I braced the phone between my shoulder and ear while balancing Wes on one hip and stirring instant oatmeal with my free hand. How bad is it? Bad. There are 3 other seniors, 2 counties over. Same signature block. Same notary stamp floating around like a ghost. I'm trying to get subpoenas on that notary's logbook. If a judge hears me, we can start pulling real evidence. And me? You're going to be the point of contact. I didn't flinch. Then I'm in. He paused. You sure? Yeah. Let's get it done. Thursday morning, the knock on the door was sharp and official. I didn't need a badge to know this was real. Stella Hill from Adult Protective Services stepped inside wearing no nonsense. Black slacks, flat shoes, tablet under one arm. She walked with the kind of quiet that told me she'd seen worse than whatever she thought she'd find here. She started right in, asked to see the bedrooms, the bathroom, the fridge. No chit-chat, no fake pleasantries, just business. She made notes on everything. Kimberly stood to the side and answered every question clearly, even the uncomfortable ones. How often do you fall? Almost never. What medications are you both on? Desmond answered that one. Blood pressure, cholesterol, vitamins. We take them at breakfast. Every day. When was the last time you went to a doctor? 2 weeks ago, I said. Checkups. I keep all the visit records in a binder. You want it? She nodded. I didn't try to sell our situation. I just handed over the binder, along with the printouts of our meal logs, repair logs, and the written agreement Desmond and Kimberly signed with me. I showed her the baby gate at the top of the stairs, the outlet covers, and the weekly calendar taped to the fridge. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just made more notes. She asked about the fire extinguisher. I pointed it out, mounted on the wall near the kitchen. She checked the tag. 3 years expired. Noted, I said. I'll replace it today. She didn't comment on the baby monitor on the shelf, or the list of grocery prices stuck to the cabinet with magnets. But she saw them. Finally, she said, We received an anonymous call claiming unsafe housing conditions and possible elder exploitation. My stomach didn't drop. I was already there. Did the call come from this area? Henry County. That was all I needed to hear. I didn't say Holden's name, but the area code alone said enough. My jaw locked the way Lena used to say gave me away every time I was about to argue with someone in public. Stella closed her tablet. We'll be in touch. When she left, I poured coffee into the chipped blue mug I always used when I felt like I was treading water. My hand shook just enough to splash a few drops onto the counter. Desmond leaned against the wall, arms crossed. It's not like we're hiding, he said. No, but people confuse help with control. So we follow the rules. We make a record. That afternoon, Mr. Ashford tacked a laminated notice on the hallway corkboard. Reminder: occupancy limits and visitor restrictions are in effect under Section 7 of all leases. I didn't let it sit. I knocked on his apartment door and handed him Stella's card. We're under APS review. Everything's documented. No noise, no drama. I'll keep you posted. Ashford looked at the card, then at me. No parties, no problems. Landlord language for, don't make me pick sides. Thank you. That was it. But it meant something. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at an empty text bubble I almost sent to Holden. I wanted to tell him everything. About the report, the visit, how I wasn't stupid for trusting people he wouldn't even bother to learn the names of. Instead, I called Fisher. Are anonymous call records discoverable? Maybe. If it's relevant in a criminal or civil matter, needs a protective order. You think this one will be? I looked at the open binder on my lap, full of meal logs and receipts, and said, It will. We kept pushing forward. I handled my calls. Kimberly handled Wes. Desmond fixed a leaking pipe under the sink with nothing but a bucket and 3 zip ties. The place ran like a tight little ship. One night, after Wes went down, I stood in front of the dry erase board and started writing. I listed my work hours, call blocks, and grocery runs. I drew lines for naps, meal prep, and emergency contact info. Then, at the bottom, I wrote in red, "We decide together." I circled it and put the marker down. Because if someone came asking again, I wanted it in plain sight. This wasn't chaos. It was order. It was family. On purpose. Fisher laid it out over the phone like a contractor explaining a complicated roof job. "Temporary emergency limited guardianship by consent," he said. "Narrow scope. 9 months. Time boxed. Paired with a durable healthcare power of attorney and a supported decision-making agreement. It's the cleanest legal shield you're going to get without a war." I was pacing in the kitchen, phone to my ear, stirring powdered formula with one hand, while Wes grunted in his bouncer. "That's a lot of responsibility." "It is," he said. "It also makes you more exposed to a challenge if anyone decides to contest it. But it gives you standing. Right now, you're just the guy with the couch. You need to be the guy with the paperwork." After Wes was down, I sat Desmond and Kimberly at the table. No warm-up, no preamble, just the question. "Do you want me to do this? Do you want legal protection so no one can come in here and take you out of this house unless it's your choice?" They looked at each other, same way they always did when it mattered. Desmond gave a little nod first. Kimberly followed. Desmond said, "We trust you." Kimberly added, "Make it official." That was all I needed. We filed at the DeKalb County Probate Court. I filled out the forms in triplicate, handed over our logs, and stapled every grocery receipt and printout like I was building armor out of documentation. My employer faxed a letter confirming my remote status and my current work metrics. Stella submitted a report. No abuse observed, stable home routine, minor hazards noted and addressed. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. The courtroom was small, quiet, smelled like old wood and coffee. Judge Lyles sat on the bench in a simple black robe, glasses low on her nose, no nonsense in her tone. She read through the petition, then looked straight at me. "Mr. Lewis, do you understand what you're asking to take on?" "Yes, Your Honor." "This guardianship does not make you their child, their owner, or their savior. It makes you their legal point of responsibility. Are you prepared to carry that?" "Yes, ma'am." She turned to Desmond and Kimberly. "Where do you want to live?" Desmond didn't even hesitate. "With Brian and Wes." Kimberly smiled like she was holding back tears. "I take care of the boy. He takes care of us." That was all it took. Judge Lyles signed the order. 9-month emergency limited guardianship by consent, with quarterly written updates and home visits every other month. The concurrent healthcare power of attorney and supported decision-making agreement were acknowledged and entered into record. Stella didn't raise any objections. She nodded once like she already knew how this would go and just wanted to see if we could stick the landing. Outside the courthouse, I saw Holden standing on the sidewalk. He didn't come in, but he made absolutely sure I saw him. "You're in over your head," he said. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to explain to a man who thought giving me a bag of diapers made him a co-parent. Fisher leaned over as we walked toward the car. "By the way," he said, "I got the phone records. Under seal. If we need it, we'll use it." He didn't say Holden's name, but I saw it in his eyes. I filed that knowledge away like a spare key, not something to use, something to keep. That night, Kimberly made a pot of stew like we'd won the lottery. Desmond fixed the bathroom fan that had been whining since March like it was a celebration project. Wes slept 6 hours straight for the first time since he was born. I wrote it on the dry erase board like it mattered as much as a court order, because in this house it did. Next morning, my supervisor pinged me with a vague message about metrics. "Thanks for the update. Please be mindful of client response times." HR speak for don't let your personal life bleed into the call queue. I replied politely, explained the court appointment, then doubled down on my schedule. I couldn't afford to slip. There's always a meter running somewhere, and you'd better know which one gets you paid. We printed the court order, slid it into a plastic frame, and stuck it on the bookshelf under the photo of Lena holding Wes in the hospital. Just in case anyone official ever walked in asking who was in charge and what our arrangement looked like on paper. Underneath the frame, I stuck a yellow sticky note that said, "We choose each other." Because that's the only reason any of this held. Kimberly said it best when she poured coffee the next morning. Same old chipped mug from my bottom cabinet. I don't know what people think a family is, but this is one. Paper or no paper. Desmond clinked his spoon in his bowl and added, "They'll see that. If they're looking with the right eyes." Wes babbled from the playpen and slapped his hands together like he was making a point too. Later that week, we went through the apartment with a checklist. I replaced the fire extinguisher, put fresh batteries in the smoke detectors, labeled the pill organizer in big letters. We added a grab bar near the shower and moved the cleaning supplies out of reach just in case APS popped back in early. We kept every receipt. It became a rhythm. Me logging calls, Desmond keeping the place humming, Kimberly managing meals and diapers with a grace I couldn't match. Every Sunday night we sat at the table and reviewed the budget, the calendar, and the grocery list. Sometimes we argued over brand names. Sometimes we laughed about it, but we stayed on the same page. I added one more tab to the binder and labeled it Compliance, because I knew the day would come when someone would ask how we were managing 3 generations under one roof, and I wanted the answer to be better than most. 2 weeks after the guardianship papers got signed and framed, my phone lit up with a Manhattan number I didn't recognize. I answered halfway through folding bath towels. "Mr. Lewis, this is Kayla Richardson, Desmond and Kimberly's daughter. I've heard some story. I want to see my parents." Her tone had that clipped rhythm people use when they're used to being in control. She sounded expensive. I told her I'd ask Desmond and Kimberly first. That didn't go over well. I think it's important they hear from their actual family, not someone who stepped in. I didn't engage. "They'll decide," I said, and hung up. That evening, I told them. Desmond looked calm. "Invite her," he said, like it was nothing more than letting someone in for dinner. Kimberly stared down at the grocery list in her lap. At first, she just said, "I'm not ready." Then she looked up. But running didn't help before. Let's hear what she has to say. Saturday morning, 10 sharp, I buzzed her in. Kayla walked in wearing a tailored gray coat that probably cost more than my entire monthly rent, and heels that didn't belong anywhere near my cracked kitchen tiles. Her husband followed 2 steps behind her, face tight, eyes scanning everything like he expected to smell mold or find broken furniture. We offered them chairs. They didn't sit. Kayla looked straight at me. I need to understand what's going on here. I already had the folder in hand. I opened it on the table. Guardianship by consent. Durable healthcare power of attorney. Supported decision-making agreement. All legal. All signed. All reviewed by the probate judge. APS has been here multiple times. She blinked. "You filed for guardianship?" "No," I said. "They asked me to, after their son stole their house." Her husband finally spoke. "We haven't heard everything yet." Desmond didn't flinch. "Some stories are facts. Our house is gone. So's the money." Kayla stepped toward him. "Daddy, I could bring you both up to New York. You'd have a proper place. Care. Options." Desmond didn't raise his voice. "We aren't cargo." Kimberly just said, "I take care of Wes. Brian takes care of us. That's the arrangement." Kayla's eyes snapped back to me. "You do realize what this looks like? You take in 2 elderly people and suddenly have legal control? This feels like trauma bonding, not caregiving." I didn't react. Didn't need to. They left not long after. I walked them out without saying much, and the moment the door closed, I felt it. That gut sense that this wasn't over. 4 days later, Fisher called. His tone was surgical. "She filed." "Where?" "Wake County, petition to transfer guardianship, alleging coercion, medical neglect, inadequate housing, lack of experience, CC'd APS and signed with a firm that likes to write motions that sound like press releases. Okay, I said. What now? We fight it. I need photos, logs, statements, receipts, records of everything, meals, meds, doctor visits. Document your routine like you're writing a training manual. I got to work. Nights after Wes went down, I built binders, meal logs, med logs, photos of the faucet Desmond fixed, the shelves Kimberly organized, the labels on every cabinet. I added a letter from my supervisor confirming I was in good standing through the quarter. I got one from Wes's pediatrician noting improved sleep patterns and weight gain. Neighbors gave statements about the quiet, clean apartment and how often they saw Desmond walking Wes around the block. Stella came for another home visit the following week. She didn't say much, measured the hallway, tested the outlet covers, checked the fridge. Kimberly was holding Wes when Stella looked over. He reached for her. No crying, no hesitation. Stella watched them a beat longer than she needed to. Her final note read, "No observed neglect or exploitation. Stable environment. Cooperative reporting." Typed like a spreadsheet entry, but I read between the lines. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Kayla sat with two lawyers and a psychologist wearing a navy blazer and that academic look that means he's about to say a lot without saying anything useful. He talked about rescuer dynamics and vulnerability thresholds, and said Desmond and Kimberly were in a compromised emotional state post-housing loss. Fisher stood and asked, "Did you find evidence of cognitive impairment?" "No." "Any observed emotional manipulation or abuse?" "No." "Any evidence they want to leave?" "No." That was enough. Kayla spoke next. She cried, hands folded on the table, said she loved her parents, said she was just trying to do right, said she'd been overwhelmed and caught off guard when she heard about what happened with Gregory. I didn't hate her. I've seen what guilt does to people when they show up late and don't know how to say sorry. Fisher didn't tear her down. He walked the judge through everything, the logs, the schedules, the emergency plan, the APS letters, the signed agreement, and finally, he repeated the question Judge Lyles had asked at the first hearing. "Where do you want to live?" Desmond answered first. "With Brian and Wes. That's our choice." Kimberly nodded. "I have a role here. I matter here. That's all we ever wanted." Then came the twist. Fisher pulled out a sealed envelope and handed it to the clerk. "Your Honor, with permission, I'd like to submit phone record documentation we obtained under protective order." Lyles waved it forward. Fisher continued. "This is the origin of the anonymous APS call that triggered the first welfare check. It came from a Henry County number registered to Holden Morris, my client's father-in-law." The air thinned. Everyone in the courtroom felt it. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew Holden was sitting behind me. Judge Lyles did glance that way, just for a second. Kayla's face changed. Not anger at me, but something sharper. Like she realized someone had tried to blow up a house from the outside without caring who was inside. She looked at her husband, then her parents. Desmond didn't gloat. He just folded his hands and stared at the table. Judge Lyles ruled the transfer denied. She reaffirmed my guardianship, ordered quarterly reviews, kept the home visit schedule. Then she looked right at Kayla. "Distance does not equal care, and not showing up doesn't disqualify someone from being family. But showing up late means learning to follow, not lead." Outside the courthouse, Kayla stood beside me while her husband waited at the car. She said, "I was wrong about you." I shrugged. "You were scared. So was I. I'm going to try to be better. I hope you do. This world's already hard enough." That night, Holden called. I didn't pick up. His message said, "I only did what I thought was right for Wes." I deleted it. Sometimes the only revenge you need is a quiet house and a locked door he doesn't have a key to. The job offer came out of nowhere. A recruiter from a mid-size Raleigh firm reached out through LinkedIn. Client intake and compliance work, fully remote, flexible scheduling, salary that made me stop and reread the email 3 times, benefits I didn't think people like me got, caregiver support stipend, FMLA-aligned leave, quarterly wellness credits. I forwarded it to Fisher and asked if it looked legit. He replied 5 minutes later, "This is the kind of boring paperwork that saves lives." We packed the apartment in 4 days. I emailed Stella the forwarding address and filed for guardianship registration in North Carolina under UAG PPJA, the Uniform Adult Guardianship and Protective Proceedings Jurisdiction Act. I had to look up what all those letters stood for twice. We moved in early fall, into a tan rental with chipped siding and a backyard full of bald patches and possibilities. The swing set was secondhand, the tomato cages rusted, but it was ours. 30 days after we arrived, the Wake County Court accepted our filing and converted the DeKalb emergency guardianship into a standard limited one with the same scope and schedule. Quarterly updates, home visits every other month, no surprises. Within the first week, the church ladies on the block dropped off casseroles and banana bread like we'd been voted into a club. Mr. Givens across the street walked over with a tiller and said, "I heard y'all garden," then left it without asking names. Kimberly found a book group at the public library that met every Wednesday. Desmond stumbled into the community garden behind the fire station, and by the second meeting, was running the tool shed. Wes started saying gamma and throwing himself into Kimberly's arms like she was the sun. When I saw that, I stepped out on the porch and blamed the pollen in my eyes, even though it was October. We met Susan at Wake Med after Desmond's blood pressure spiked from stress during a grocery run. He'd gone pale and dizzy in the bread aisle, and I drove him straight in. She was the nurse in triage, calm, even, sharp. Asked about his shipyard years in Savannah like it was the most interesting thing she'd heard all month. She walked Desmond through breathing techniques, adjusted his meds without fuss, and told him to watch his salt. I told her our situation: guardianship, grandkid, legal mess, old grief still in the walls. She didn't flinch, just nodded and said, "Sounds like you're doing more than most people who claim to have it together." We kept it slow. A few dinners, some long walks, nights where she helped cut Wes's food into bite-sized pieces without making a show of it. She asked Kimberly about her favorite hymns, let Desmond explain his tinkering rituals with anything that buzzed or blinked. She never talked down, never danced around. She treated them like the point, not the obstacle. Then Holden filed for grandparent visitation, claimed I was alienating him from Wes, claimed I'd made unilateral decisions without proper familial involvement. Mediation was required by the court. Fisher was ready with the sealed phone records from the Georgia case. The mediator reviewed them in private, came back from caucus and said, "Mr. Morris, we strongly advise withdrawal." Holden didn't look at me when he signed the dismissal. Kimberly taught Susan the chamomile trick for colic. Susan taught Kimberly how to take blood pressure without pinching skin. I sat on the couch one night while they swapped notes like old friends trading recipes, and I knew I didn't need to steer this ship. I just needed to stay out of the way when it was running right. Kayla started calling every Sunday. Sometimes she asked about Desmond's blood work or Kimberly's new books. Sometimes she just listened while Wes babbled about trucks. She didn't try to move them, didn't challenge anything. One time she sent a box of thick winter coats and a handwritten card that said, "Stay warm, love you." They said thank you. She said she'd call next week. And she did. Fisher emailed one morning with a subject line that just said, "Win, kind of." He'd gotten a civil default judgment in a Georgia court. One of Gregory's shell companies failed to answer. The court ordered $38,400 in restitution. We never saw a cent, but the judgment sat in the system like a sign on the door. This happened, and the court agrees. Some nights, after Wes finally gave up the fight and crashed in his bed, I'd step out to the porch where Susan already sat. She'd be sipping decaf tea in that calm way she always did when things were good, but you still couldn't relax. "You're wound tight again," she said once. I nodded, still waiting for the next shoe. She looked at me over the rim of her cup. "We'll tie the laces together." Corny, but it worked. I exhaled and let it be quiet for once. We wrote a new family agreement on better paper, with firmer language. Same core deal. housing and legal help in exchange for childcare, meals, and home maintenance. But we added Susan as a witness and added clauses about medical emergencies and short-term absences. Everyone signed. Kimberly stuck it on the fridge under a carrot-shaped magnet. If you walked into our kitchen, you knew exactly how our house ran. Nothing fuzzy. No maybe. That winter, Wes learned to put on his own boots. Desmond painted garden stakes in the garage. Kimberly organized every spice jar in alphabetical order and started leaving notes for Susan with grocery shortcuts. I finished my onboarding at the new firm and got my first paycheck that had 4 digits before the decimal point. Susan and I weren't rushing anything, but the pieces were starting to line up. Her, me, this house, this mess, this family that didn't start with blood but certainly didn't need it to function. We weren't saving the world. We were just keeping a steady routine, taking turns, and making sure everybody had a warm meal and a reason to wake up the next day. That's more than most people get. Desmond collapsed in the garden on a Tuesday afternoon. One second he was laughing with Wes over a crooked tomato cage. The next he was face down in the dirt. No warning. No sound. Just gone from upright to not. I called 911 before I even finished saying his name. EMS was fast. 3 medics, efficient and calm, like they'd done this drill 1,000 times. Kimberly rode up front, and I followed in the car, Wes strapped in the back seat, holding a stuffed rabbit like a lifeline. The cardiologist laid it out straight. Severe coronary artery disease, 3 blockages, a bypass recommended. Survival odds are in the mid-60s, he said, and it didn't matter how soft his voice got. 60% means nothing when the person on the table is your whole house's foundation. The kids showed up quick. Kayla flew in from New York on a red-eye. Gary drove over from Durham, and Cynthia came up from Columbia with her suitcase still half-zipped. Nobody yelled. Nobody argued. Susan kept the tone calm and the questions practical. I signed the admissions as legal guardian. They signed the family consents. The surgeon came in, shook everyone's hand, and said, "We proceed in an hour." 6 hours later, the nurse came out with that sentence everyone waits for and fears in equal parts. He made it. Susan counted respirations while they wheeled him past, explained the machines and tubes and how the sedatives would wear off slow. Kimberly sat in the corner clutching a rosary a neighbor had pressed into her hand. I didn't pray. I haven't since Lena died. But I didn't stop her either. Recovery was slow. Hospitals are made of clocks and wires and second guesses. A month passed in beeps and blood draws. Susan coached his breathing like a drill sergeant with a soft voice. I learned drug names that still twist my tongue. Wes colored tomatoes and drew smiley faces on index cards. We taped them to the whiteboard. Every nurse mentioned them. When Desmond finally made it to a chair in the backyard, face thinner but eyes sharp, I asked Susan to marry me. No kneeling, no ring, just my voice and her hand and the truth. I'm not trying to make something pretty. I just want to name what already is. You belong here, in the mess. If you'll have us, say yes. She said yes like she'd already decided days ago. Then she hugged Kimberly first, like she knew who needed the anchor. We held the wedding 2 weeks later, right there in the yard. Nothing big. Desmond sat in a folding chair near the tomatoes. Kimberly wore lavender and held a bouquet the grandkids and Susan picked from the garden. Gary grilled. Kayla made playlists. Cynthia wrangled the toddlers. Nobody said anything about blood or obligation. People just showed up, and that was enough. I mailed Holden an announcement. Photo of Wes in a little bow tie tucked inside. He texted back one word. Congratulations. That was the end of it, and that was fine. 3 months later, Susan called me into the bathroom and held up a stick with 2 pink lines. I sat on the edge of the tub like the air had been punched out of me. She looked nervous until I laughed and said, "All right then, guess we build again." Dr. Q said it was a girl. We named her Ingrid, after Susan's grandmother on her mother's side. Not Lena's name, not her place. That wasn't the point. We were building, not replacing. Kimberly cried. Desmond got out his graph paper and started sketching plans for a cradle. Wes ran laps around the kitchen shouting, "My sister!" like he'd just won a prize he had no idea how to handle but loved anyway. Ingrid came on a quiet morning in spring. Susan slept while Kimberly rocked the baby in the front room, humming that low hymn she always defaulted to when things were just too big. Desmond ran his fingers over the cradle rails. They were sanded smooth and curved like a boat hull. He said, "That'll hold." And I knew he wasn't just talking about the wood. The house changed again. Noisier, tighter, full. Susan went back to shifts after 8 weeks, and I shifted my headset hours to early mornings and late evenings. Kimberly kept a wall calendar that could have run air traffic control. Desmond became the baby's personal mechanic, adjusting her seat buckles, fixing loose buttons, muttering boat stories into her ear while she giggled like she understood every word. I'd tuck Wes in, rock Ingrid to sleep, and sit on the porch like a man who had finally run out of emergencies. Some nights I'd say, "We did all right today." Susan would say, "We did," and that was all I needed. It started with small things, Kimberly putting salt in her tea, asking me twice if it was Tuesday when it was Saturday, calling Wes Daryl, a name none of us knew. Then one morning, she looked straight at me and asked where Brian was. I said, "Right here," and her eyes watered before she smiled and said, "Well, you look taller today." The doctor didn't sugarcoat it. Early stage Alzheimer's, progression unknown. Could be slow, could be sudden. We needed to prepare the house and ourselves. We labeled everything: cabinets, drawers, pill containers. Susan made big laminated calendars with color-coded stickers. We added a daily walk to the routine. Some mornings Desmond just stood in the kitchen holding a mug like he'd forgotten why he came in. Susan started writing short notes that began, "Hi Kimberly, it's morning," and taping them to the fridge. Good days still came. She beat me at cards more often than not. Laughed until she cried over some joke Wes made with a banana peel. Then there were days she stared out the window and didn't recognize the garden she once ruled. One afternoon, she wandered halfway down the block before Desmond found her. He didn't panic, just walked beside her, talking soft, like it was any other Tuesday. She died in her sleep on a Sunday. 78 years old. No drama. Just didn't wake up. The church ladies filled the yard. Desmond wore the same jacket from our wedding. Kayla stood beside Susan holding Ingrid, who had no idea what was happening but smiled anyway. Gary and Cynthia flanked their father and didn't say much, but their arms stayed tight around him the whole time. Afterward, the house got quieter than I liked. Not empty, just hollow. Desmond moved like a man carrying a heavy box with both arms. Careful, slow, never asking for help. He still watered the tomatoes, still wiped the counters, but the pace was different. Then, 2 years after we buried Kimberly, 7 years after Gregory went down for the fraud, he showed up. It was a Tuesday again. He stood on my porch in a worn gray shirt and jeans that didn't fit right. Gaunt, grayer, eyes dull but focused. He said, "I'm not here to beg. I just need to say it. To them, not to you. I know what I did." I could have closed the door. Believe me, it crossed my mind. Instead, I told him, "Wait here." Desmond was at the table teaching Wes how to flip pancakes without scratching the pan. I said the name. The spatula dropped, and the air changed. He didn't speak, just nodded and followed me out back. We sat them on the porch, gave them space. Susan stayed inside. I didn't eavesdrop. I watched faces. I saw pain, anger. A pause so long I thought someone might walk off. Then something shifted. A slow, heavy peace that came like tired acceptance. They came back inside and ate breakfast together. Gregory cried while chewing. Said, "Thank you," like it hurt to say out loud. Desmond didn't smile, but he looked lighter somehow, like the box he'd been carrying shifted to one arm. Gregory started coming once a month, never stayed long, brought bad cupcakes, dented toy trucks, the kind you get from a gas station rack. Desmond told him flat, Keep your money. If you want to fix anything, show up. Gregory nodded, and he kept showing up. Later that year, Desmond called me into his room. His face was calm, still. He said, "Doctor used the phrase palliative goals today. Said we're past tuning up the engine." I didn't say anything. He added, "When I go, I want you to keep Gregory close. Not like a son. Just don't let him vanish again. He doesn't need a second hole to fall into." I said I'd try. He said, "Promise." And I did. We moved his chair to the window so he could watch the yard. Ingrid ran like the ground belonged to her. Wes followed. Desmond watched and said, "That's good," every time they touched the fence. Never said what he meant by it. Didn't need to. He died that fall, right there in that chair. My hand in his right, Gregory's in his left. Quiet, like someone clocking out at the end of a long, solid shift. I'm not big on speeches, but some things deserve straight talk. When I walked into that laundromat in Atlanta, I was barely hanging on. Young, widowed, bone-tired, mad at the world, and scared out of my mind to be alone with a baby and my own thoughts. I thought I was giving two strangers a ride. What I got was a family I didn't know I was missing. From that first night to the day we buried Desmond, it was 9 full years. Not perfect years, but full. That's what matters. We never beat Gregory in court like some kind of legal movie. There wasn't a big payout, no secret bank account stashed under his mattress. But there were indictments, a conviction, restitution orders with no payout but black ink that told the truth. And better than any of that, he had to look Desmond in the face and ask for a seat at a table he once tried to burn down. Holden's payback came in a smaller form. When he tried to file for grandparent visitation, Fisher slid the sealed APS phone record across the mediator's table without a word. Holden stared at it, then said he was withdrawing his petition. I kept the old voicemail he left. I did what I thought was right for Wes, and never listened to it again. Wake County APS picked up the file after we moved. Stella from Georgia forwarded her report and walked the new caseworker through our situation on the phone. About a year later, she came by during a personal trip. She stood on our porch, looked in through the screen door and said, "You kept it steady." I said, "We keep lists." She smiled, shook my hand, and left it at that. She didn't say sorry, and I didn't ask her to. Susan and I had Ingrid. For a while, the house sounded like cartoons and pots clanging, and too much cereal spilled on linoleum. Wes grew fast, 12 now, and still calls Desmond Grandpa in his stories. Still says Grandma when he explains the chamomile trick to his little sister. The photos on the wall do the rest. Kayla kept calling. Gary and Cynthia showed up again the Thanksgiving after the funeral. They brought pie, offered to help fix the fence, and asked questions that came from a good place. Nobody used the word forgiveness. They just started showing up, and that's how healing really starts. You want a lesson? Here's mine. Blood matters, but showing up matters more. Legal papers matter, but soup at 6 o'clock matters more. Revenge feels big at first, but restoration is the thing that lets you breathe again. I can still smell that stew Kimberly made the day we got the guardianship signed. I can still see Desmond's hands tightening a hinge on the bathroom door without being asked. He told me once, "You fix what you can reach." That was it. That was his whole philosophy. Turns out it's enough. Sometimes I think about that other version of the night in the laundromat, me keeping to myself, nodding politely, going home alone. I would have kept the apartment quiet, sure, but I'd have missed the very thing that made my life make sense. Wes is 12 now. Ingrid just turned 9. They set an extra plate for Uncle Gregory when he visits. They know the tomatoes in the yard came from Grandpa Des, and when they ask why we took in people we didn't owe anything to, I tell them the truth. We didn't take people in. We made room for our own. If you ever get that chance, take it. It might save someone. It might save you. Hey, just before you scroll, let me ask you something real. If someone knocked on your door needing help, would you make space or shut it out of fear? If this story hit home, please tap the hype to help it reach more people who might need to hear it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It means everything and takes one click. And drop a comment below, even just powerful story or your own take. I'll be reading. Love you guys.
YouTube picked this for you. Tap it. Let's see if they guessed right.